The loneliness drove him to the bottle more often now, the sharp burn of whiskey dulling the ache he carried. Nights that once held music now dissolved into quiet despair, his guitar gathering dust in the corner. It was during one of those nights he found Sophie, a fellow musician with a smoky laugh and weary eyes who knew too well the sting of rejection. They bonded over broken dreams, shared chords and cheap drinks, long conversations that blurred into early mornings. With Sophie, he didn't have to pretend he was fine, she understood the pain, the hunger, the emptiness. Yet, every time she laughed, every time she reached across the table to touch his hand, he thought of Clara, and felt the betrayal simmering in his chest. Their lives moved in parallel, successes tinged with incompleteness, victories soured by longing. Clara stood in Parisian galleries with her work displayed, people clapping, her mentors whispering about her future. But when the crowd dispersed, she would slip into the quiet of her apartment, staring at the empty space beside her, whispering into the silence, "Ryan, I wish you were here." Across the ocean, Ryan sat in dim clubs strumming to small, distracted crowds, his music raw with pain. His pride had kept him from chasing her, but pride didn't warm an empty bed. "I chose my pride over her," he admitted once to Sophie, his voice thick with drink, "and now I'm alone." Sophie leaned in that night, her lips brushing his in a fleeting, vulnerable kiss. For a moment, Ryan let it happen, long enough to feel the warmth of human connection he craved, but then he pulled back sharply, guilt flooding through him like poison. "I can't," he muttered, shaking his head, ashamed. Sophie didn't press, but the damage was done. The kiss lingered like a bruise on his conscience, a betrayal even if it hadn't gone further. Clara's absence had carved a hole in him, and for a moment, he had tried to fill it with someone else. But guilt wouldn't let him rest, and love, no matter how fractured, still bound him to her. Both of them were winning battles in their careers, yet losing the war in their hearts. And though they didn't know it yet, the cracks in their love were spreading wider, pulling them toward choices that would either destroy them completely, or force them to fight for each other once more. Months had passed, and the world looked different for both of them. Ryan, after endless rejections and half-empty bars, finally got his call, a slot at a major music festival, the kind of platform that could change everything. He poured himself into rehearsals, his voice raw with determination, his guitar strung with new fire. The night of the festival, the city pulsed with music and light, crowds gathering in waves. Meanwhile, Clara had completed her fellowship in Paris, a triumph on paper, her name whispered in studios and her designs pinned proudly on walls, but her heart still pulled her home. She boarded a flight without telling Ryan, clutching the hope of surprising him, of bridging the silence that had stretched too long. When she stepped into the festival crowd, the stage lights illuminated him, and for the first time in months, she saw him not as the man left behind, but as the artist he had always wanted to be. Her chest swelled with pride, tears pricking her eyes as his voice carried across the field, raw and alive. In that moment, Clara believed maybe, just maybe, they could still find their way back. She waited backstage after the set, ready to tell him how proud she was, ready to say the words she had swallowed for too long. But fate never let their reunions come easy. Sophie was there, lingering at the edge of the backstage crowd, her eyes catching Clara's before drifting toward Ryan. When Ryan rushed off stage, sweat-soaked and exhilarated, Clara stepped forward with a smile trembling on her lips. But before she could speak, Sophie's voice cut in, low, sharp, edged with spite. "Funny, isn't it? While you were off in Paris, he wasn't exactly alone." The words hit Clara like a blow, her stomach twisting. She turned to Ryan, eyes wide, her voice breaking. "What is she talking about?" Ryan froze, his exhilaration fading to ash. "It was nothing," he said quickly. "I was lost. I was broken. But it didn't mean anything." Clara's voice rose, trembling with fury and heartbreak. "While I was building my dream, you almost replaced me. That's what I come back to." Ryan's face hardened, his own wounds surfacing. And while I was drowning, you weren't there. You chose Paris. You left me. Their words clashed like thunder, raw and jagged, years of unspoken pain finally tearing free. Around them, people glanced uncomfortably, but the world had narrowed to just the two of them, love and anger colliding in a storm that neither could contain. The shouting broke into silence, both of them shaking, eyes wet with tears. Sophie slipped away, her petty victory won, leaving the two of them to face the wreckage. Clara's chest heaved, her voice dropping to a whisper. I thought Paris was the betrayal. Then Sophie. But now I see, it was us. We betrayed each other. Ryan stared at her, the truth dawning in his exhausted eyes. Not by cheating. Not by leaving. But by refusing to believe in each other's dreams. The words hung heavy, undeniable. For the first time, they weren't blaming Sophie, or Paris, or timing, they were blaming the walls they had built, the pride they had clung to. Clara's tears spilled freely now, not just of anger but of release, as though naming the truth cracked something open. Ryan stepped closer, his voice breaking. I didn't need you to stay, Clara. I needed you to believe in me. And I should have believed in you. She met his gaze, raw and vulnerable. And I should have been there, even from across the ocean. The realization didn't erase the pain, but it shifted it, turning it from an ending into the possibility of something new. Their love wasn't destroyed by Paris or Sophie. It had been eroded by silence and pride. And now, standing in the aftermath, they finally saw it clearly. The morning after the storm, Paris and Sophie faded into the background, the only thing left was truth. Clara sat across from Ryan in the quiet of a cafe, her fingers curled around a mug of coffee gone cold. For the first time, she wasn't trembling with guilt or anger, she was steady, her voice clear. I can't lose myself for us, Ryan. I won't. My work, my future, that matters. But so do I. If we're together, it's as equals, not anchors dragging each other down. Her words weren't an ultimatum this time, they were a boundary, firm and necessary. She wasn't the same girl who had boarded a plane months ago, desperate for both Paris and his approval. She had learned that her worth didn't depend on his support, or anyone's. Her fellowship had proven she could stand on her own, but love had taught her that standing alone wasn't the same as closing herself off. She wanted both, a career built with her own hands, and a love that didn't demand she shrink herself. Looking at Ryan now, she realized that if he couldn't accept that, she would walk away. Not in anger, not in regret, but in dignity. And for the first time, she felt the quiet strength of knowing her life wouldn't collapse if she did. Ryan listened, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. For once, he didn't rush to defend himself, didn't let pride armor his wounds. He thought of the months wasted on bitterness, the nights numbed with whiskey, the fleeting comfort of Sophie's company, all the ways he had tried to mask his fear of being left behind. Pride had been his enemy, not Clara. I almost ruined everything, he admitted, his voice low but unflinching. Not because of Paris. Not because of Sophie. Because I couldn't let go of my pride long enough to see what we had. He looked at his hands, calloused from years of playing, from chasing applause that never seemed enough. I don't want to live chasing validation anymore. I want to build something real. Slowly, steadily, even if it means starting small. I want a career, not a fantasy. His honesty stripped him raw, but it also freed him. For the first time, Ryan wasn't comparing himself to Eric, wasn't begging the world to see him. He was choosing the long road, the harder road, but one that belonged entirely to him. And as he said the words, he realized that losing Clara wasn't what terrified him most anymore, it was losing himself. Silence lingered between them, but it was no longer sharp, no longer dangerous. Clara reached across the table, her hand brushing his, not in reconciliation, but in recognition. We need space, she said softly. Not a breakup. Not goodbye. Just space to remember who we are without losing each other. Ryan nodded, his throat tightening, but there was relief in his eyes. For too long, they had clung to each other as if love was the only thing holding them up, when in truth it had become a weight. Now, they were choosing differently, not anchors, but sails, giving each other room to move, to breathe, to grow. They didn't kiss or make grand promises. Instead, they sat in the quiet understanding that love could be stronger when it wasn't suffocating. Clara smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both sadness and hope. If we find our way back, it'll be because we chose each other, not because we were afraid to be alone. Ryan squeezed her hand once, a silent vow. And in that moment, their story shifted, from a tale of sacrifice and pride to one of balance, respect, and the courage to let love breathe. Months later, Clara sat by the window of a small seaside cafe, her sketchbook open, the salt-tinged breeze ruffling its pages. The city felt far away now, both Paris and home, and so did the heavy nights of questioning who she was without Ryan or her career. Here, she was simply herself, pencil in hand, drawing lines that might one day rise into buildings, bridges, or something as simple as a sunlit archway. She had stopped sketching for approval and started sketching for joy. Around her, the cafe buzzed with chatter, laughter, the clinking of coffee cups, but Clara was content in her own quiet world. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly, a reminder that life wasn't about confinement but about tides, always moving, always returning, yet never the same. She thought about Ryan, not with bitterness or longing, but with a soft kind of warmth, as though he were another shoreline in her life, not her anchor. For the first time, she didn't feel torn between love and dreams. She had learned to choose herself, and in doing so, she had found peace. Just a few streets away, in a cozy venue tucked behind the boardwalk, Ryan adjusted the strap of his guitar. The crowd wasn't massive, no flashing lights, no roaring festival energy, but it was real. Local faces, leaning in, listening, not because of his name or Sophie's games or anyone else's shadow, but because the music spoke to them. Ryan smiled faintly as he tuned the strings. He thought of Clara often, but not with desperation. He thought of how she had fought for her dreams, how she had drawn her lines in the sand, and how he had finally learned to do the same. Music didn't need to be his revenge, his weapon, or his proof. It could just be his craft, his love, his offering. As he stepped toward the mic, his phone buzzed in his pocket, a package notification. He'd check it later. Right now, the music was enough. The package arrived the next morning. Inside was Clara's old journal, worn at the edges, filled with architectural sketches pressed between half-faded love notes, remnants of their journey. On the first page, in her handwriting, a note: dreams don't have to collide. They can run side by side. Ryan read it slowly, a smile tugging at his lips. No promises, no ultimatums, just an invitation. He closed the journal gently, holding it like something fragile but alive. Later that night, as the small venue lights dimmed, Ryan stepped onto the stage again, the journal tucked safely in his guitar case. Somewhere across town, Clara lifted her gaze from her sketches to the endless ocean, her chest rising with a peace she once thought impossible. They weren't together in the way people expected, but they hadn't let go either. They had chosen themselves first, and in doing so, they had left the door open for love to return, not as a chain, but as a choice. They didn't choose between love or dreams, they chose themselves first, and left the door open for love to follow.